Welcome to Thursday Night Saws. Hey, Chris.
How are you, sir?
I think I got it quieted down. So, maybe in a minute or two. Did you have a good week?
Yeah, man. Yep. Good week.
What all did you do?
I'm working on my shop inside the building. So put in new workbench. We got our station set up where we can put chain together. So I've been buying it in rolls and did the math. So I save about 190 bucks by buying it in the rolls, and then got a couple guys trained on putting it together.
Uh huh.
So I made a table where we can pull it out, and instead of having to measure, they could mark. Because we run the same chain on the volunteer saws, just different bar lengths. So they can just roll it off the spool, and I've got marks on the table for 20s, 25s, 28s, and 36s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To try to simplify it all, make kind of a factory kind of process there, streamline it. So turned out nice.
Yeah, I've cut a many a chain back in the days when I used to be at the steel distributorship. The steel only sold reels, so
Ah,
everything that we sold in Georgia had to be
huh.
cut, every single loop.
Wow.
But at that
Wow.
time, a lot of dealers were using the pre-cuts. I mean, the reels and cutting it themselves. But yeah, it is quite a task. We spent many a night.
Yeah, I bet. Yes, I did that, and then we've got behind our truck lot where all the semis are. There's a line of pine trees. They're Virginia pines, and they're just starting. The limbs are falling out of them, and there's some homes behind it. So I'm taking those down Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I've got some guys coming in to help, but just been moving equipment, making room for them so where we can fell them. We got to take some chain link fence down, and I think I got nine, probably 80-foot pine trees we got to fell and buck up and all that fun stuff.
Oh wow, that'd take you about an hour, won't
Yeah, it should take us about an hour or so.
it? I don't know who else is signing on tonight, but what I wanted to continue on is our discussions on the saw chain. And last week we ended up talking about, do you think dull saw chain can be more dangerous, and looking at how do you tell if a saw chain is sharp or dull. And so I guess we came up with first thing is that it should be cut in about an inch a second, I think you said.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty good rule of thumb to kind of look at. The other thing is you're looking for any damage and things that's on the teeth. So my first question tonight is what is the damage that you're really looking for,
Hmm.
and so how do you approach it as far as a damage on it?
I mean, I'm always looking at the chisel. The point and the chisel seem to me they catch most of the damage. So I'll kind of look at every tooth kind of quickly if it's not cutting well, and I'll look, kind of roll it around and look and see. And most of the time I'll see, six or eight of them. You can see where they've hit something, and it's got it's bent down. I've seen the tooth completely bent over where it's hit some fence or something inside,
Mm-hmm.
and you got some work to do. But I learned a trick from you using that flat file to get my angle back, instead of just trying to round file over and over to get the tooth sharp. Take that flat file and work all the damage out of it, and then dress it up. So that's what I've been doing. When I have teeth that are damaged, I'll take my flat file and get it back where it's a straight line. Then I'll take my furred sharpener, and then I'll put the edge on it.
Yeah, I've noticed over the years myself. It's is trying to take damage off with the round file. If you're careful, you can kind of hold it up and kind of use the middle of the round file to be a flat file, and take that
Mm-hmm.
top edge off. Get back to where there's any damaged chrome. But I found it be so much faster and straighter and easier to take the flat file and do it.
Yeah.
And then it takes maybe 3 or 4 strokes with the flat file to take off some pretty bad damage, and then you can take
100.
the round file and you can put that to chisel angle and a side plate angle back in there very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And so I found
Yeah.
that to be really about the best way to approach that.
Yeah, and it's easier for me to get that angle right with the flat file. You can just see your witness mark, and then you got that long flat file.
Uh-huh.
I can. It may just be me, but I can see that line. I have a lot better luck with it, I guess, with that flat file, getting it set back at the right angle.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that. Getting this up. The next question, you can be talking while I'm trying to figure it out here. One thing is what will point damage or anything do? What are some of the things that help you to be able to observe that as you're cutting?
Um, well, I can feel it. I can feel that it's not cutting. You have a saw in your hand enough, you can tell. Man, this thing isn't doing what it needs to do. That's the first thing for me is just the feeling of it. You can feel the saw's it's not biting, it's not going through the wood like it should.
So
I'm having to push.
you're not getting the inch a second. But then what
No,
else? Like if you happen to graze something with the right side cutters and you've just barely scored the point, say on the right side on several teeth, what kind of a sign can you look for there? What's gonna start to happen?
yeah, I'll start cutting C's.
So it starts cutting sideways.
Yeah, 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 and especially if you start when you're felling, trying to bore cut or something, instantly when you get the saw starting to go through there, you got a major problem. You may not notice when you're bucking up little small stuff, but when you start trying to cut through anything big diameter, you can definitely feel it, and especially in my opinion in a bore cut.
And
Yeah,
so that you have to look how much damage that you have there on that tooth, and then on the corner there, and then you would take that off with the flat file and then start back in with your round file.
yeah, yeah. I mean, a sawtooth to me is just like a knife. If you take a knife and you knock the point off of it, you're not going to be able to stab something with it. It's the same thing. You knock that point off of a tooth, it's not going to bite. It's not going to slide in. It's going to bounce.
So you got to have no damage, and you got to have the point definitely in good shape.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
the next question is, a lot of people say, the top angle that we've talked about really doesn't make much difference. But what does the top angle do? What kind of a cause or effect do you get out of that?
Well, to me, I get in arguments fairly often when I'm doing these trainings. Not arguments, but discussions, I guess. There's a reason that Oregon has all those angles the way that they do, and they've spent millions of dollars in engineering to make all these things work properly. And if you can set everything back the way that they have it, that tooth's going to work right. But if you start manipulating one or two of them, you got problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They have. I'm not gonna figure something out behind my house in the woodshed that the engineers that Oregon has spent, to get the smartest guys in the business to figure this thing out. I'm not any smarter than they are. So my big thing is put it back the way that they designed it.
That's what one guy always used to tell me. They spend a lot of money trying to get everything designed, and then we try to take $1.25 file and change it all, which it's a little bit different now because they cost more than $1.25. But it's still the same thing. And there's a lot of people out there that try to make themselves engineers on the saw chain instead of putting it back to box stock, and that's what I find to be really one of the most efficient. You can drop the raker down a little bit or something like that in a little bit softer woods or something, but when it comes to the tooth angles and no damage, it's pretty much that's what you're looking at. But
Yeah.
the
If
top
they can make
angle,
their saw, if they can make their chain cut, then people buy it,
yeah,
and they're in the business to sell chain. So it's a no brainer to me.
definitely. But the top angle, what does it do now? You said.
The top angle. What does the top angle do?
Yeah, in other words, whether you set it at like 15 degrees or 25 degrees or 35 degrees on the top angle, what actually does it do in the cutting process?
Well, it's gonna peel that piece of wood back.
So it basically opens up the kerf wider, doesn't it? In other
Yeah.
words, the more angle you have, the more movement to the side the tooth actually takes, and that really opens the width of the kerf for the bar and chain to get down through. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times people say, well, that top angle doesn't make that much difference. Well, if you have a ripping chain, it's probably going to be anywhere from 0 to 10 degrees. Some may be 15, but according to what it has a marker tooth of some type built into the design. But the top angle usually on a full chisel chain is about 25 degrees because it doesn't take as much side movement to actually open the kerf and clear the chip. And then your semi chisel, because it's more like a gouge instead of a V tool, it takes and it usually takes 30. In a larger profile you'll get 35 degrees sometimes on the top angle because it has to move the tooth farther to the side to clear the chip than if you have a chisel. That's the reason why
Mm-hmm.
a square ground, a square filed chain is like a V tool. It takes very little side movement. It bites the point in and then follows down that V in the tooth, and so it doesn't have a lot of side movement that's necessary.
Yeah, I just bought some square ground today. Some of the guys have been talking about it and want to see the difference in the way they perform. So I said, hey, I'll buy one and we'll put it up some 3/8, round file. Let's see how it does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's you can actually get a little bit longer tooth if you buy a square ground out of the box and then round file it, but it takes a couple filings back to be able to get the round file completely grooved out. But the square file it's fairly easy to actually sharpen. It's probably 15-20% faster in just about most all wood types. But a lot of people used to do that. They'd buy the square file like a Oregon 72 CK and the semi skip or something, and they would then round file it out. But it's because they couldn't keep up with the files or keep the situation, learn it well enough to do it. But once you get it down, it's very very efficient. So
Yeah, I've never sharpened one. I've never actually ran one. I'm looking forward to trying it out.
yeah, it's very very smooth. Did you get full skip or full complement or full or semi skip?
I got a full skip square round 20 for our. We're running on the 661 with a 28-inch bar and see what it does.
Yeah. Well, full skip gives you in hardwoods a little bit more. You'll feel the teeth a little bit more. It's not exceptionally rough, but it's you get into long bars is where it really pays off. But I ran semi skip on 20-inch for several years. You've got a third less teeth on that instead of half as many on the loop, and it's very very smooth still. Still bore cuts really really well, and both of them do as long as you keep the RPM up and it's not too hard of a piece of wood. But it's something that's a little bit more of an advanced cutting situation. You don't want to put it out there with the part-time volunteers. That's for sure.
I got you.
but it's very, very fast cutting. So the next question was everybody talks about the raker, the depth gauge, but they seem to sometimes forget about the rest of it. What do you see, or what's your feelings if you have your round ground, file in the right place on the tooth, so your side angle is not hooked, is not back sloped, and in other words, it's set pretty much perfect, and then you drop the depth gauge. What happens to that chisel angle and side plate angle? You ever notice that?
No, no.
It actually changes the angle of the chisel angle. So what it does is it feels more aggressive, and in softwoods you can apply that a little bit, but when you get into harder stuff where you're really looking for cutting speed, you start to actually lose some efficiency. See, if I take here and I drop this down, I don't change my chisel angle. If I can get anywhere you can see it.
Yep, yep.
If I have my cutting surface round filed out correctly, if I drop the depth gauge, look what happens to the chisel angle.
Yeah, yeah.
It gets steeper.
Mm-hmm.
So when that chisel angle gets steeper, that's more resistance on the cut. So
Yeah, yeah.
pulling, and in softer fiber, it'll continue to go down. But you get into dried wood or harder woods, then it starts to lose its cutting capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And also you can end up, if you take it down too much, you can increase reactive forces safety wise. But the other thing is that it takes and it'll actually take out chunks instead of shavings. And when that happens, sometimes you'll overload your saw, and you're cutting your RPM down. If probably in a normal cut, if you can keep your RPM up between 9,500 and 10,000 RPM in the kerf, you're probably at pretty much the maximum of the chain. Your RPM of the saw may be turning 13,000, but in the kerf, your chain is keeping about 10,000 RPM or a little bit less. If you get up much over that, it's very hard to get your chain to take unless you do a lot of modification on it, like a racing chain or something. But then you're setting it up to the RPM of the saw. If you try to take and you pull that RPM down to 9,000, and it feels like it's really pulling, you really haven't picked up that much in time. And that, you see a lot of people taking time videos and stuff, and it's something to where the operator plays probably 75% of that part.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can take three people and give them that same saw, and all the cutting times are going to be different.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you set it up and you get used to it and you understand the pressure that you're applying, or really you should be holding back on the chainsaw just a little bit to get it to feed. And if you've got your depth gauges taking too much, and it's trying to bite in too straight, then you have to thin out this to compensate for it. So that's the reason why you start to see people getting down into here, and they start getting down into the gullet real deep, is because they're changing that chisel angle to match their lower depth gauge.
It makes a lot of sense. It goes back to setting your chain up the way that the factory specs are.
They're not only setting it up for Douglas fir or white poplar or white pine or yellow pine or oak or hardwood. They're looking for something that's consistent over a realm of different trees,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
when we're out there working, and especially most of the time you're not dealing with exactly the same species all the time. You need something that cuts well everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. So that's the thing of keeping it kind of box stock is one of the best ways to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's, a lot of people don't realize how that affects it. And so if I take that file and I hold it too high, I'm really gonna blunt my chisel angle. If I hold it too low and I start to hook out this side, then it starts to thin it out. And there I've got to change something to get it to cut. It's gonna dull quicker too. So as I start to look, that proper setting is what I'm ideally looking for. So a lot of people they think, well, I'll drop the rakers down on it, I'll get it to cut. But if their filing is such that it's not approaching the proper angles in that side plate and chisel angle, then you end up losing, quite a lot there in efficiency. And next one is well, it's kind of discussing a little bit there is what's the importance of the proper side plate angle and also the side angle sharpness, because everybody feels that top plate, kind of rubbing their thumb across it or whatever to see if it's a knife type edge, but in reality that just scoops out. What has to do the hardest work is that side plate from the point down to the thickness that your depth gauge is allowing the tooth to take. So if you've got any damage on that side plate, or you don't have your top angles correct so that your side plate angle, inside angle, comes out correctly, then you have resistance there. And so all of that kind of works together.
Gotta have it all.
Yeah. And the next thing I was thinking about, and I get this question quite often, is the file size. What do you think the file size actually does to your, let's say you've got a full profile 3/8 and you have a 3/16 file. What does that do to your side plate angle and your chisel angle?
Well, if you don't use the right files, to throw everything off.
You think so?
If you don't have the right file.
So if you think about what I said about the height from the point down the side plate, and you've got a 3/16 file versus 7/32. If you were to hold that file at about 1/5 above the top plate, whether it's a 3/16 or a 7/32, you would basically have the same profile going on your chisel angle and the side plate.
If you hold it up to 1/5, yeah.
So you could actually use a smaller file and be able to get the same or possibly even better cutting capacity on the tooth, but you can't go really larger unless you get way down into the gullet.
Right.
And that happens almost automatically. Do you know why? Think about it. How would that automatically be working no matter what size file you have as you file the tooth back? What starts to happen? It's a relationship of the depth gauge we talked about before. From the point to the back of the tooth, what happens to it? From right here to right here, what takes place?
If you're filing, it's going down.
From here to here, it goes downhill, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if you have a larger radius file and you don't keep it, cutting down into this gullet area, what's going to happen here? You're going to end up making your chisel angle too vertical, too blunt. If you think about it, if I had a smaller file on this tooth and I kept that file in the proper position, as long as the diameter of the file will cut the chisel angle, right, the width of it, it would actually keep the same cutting ratio to the chip all the way back. That's a big advantage of square ground. Now, a lot of people will take the gullet out of square ground, and the reason is because this part right here starts sticking out past the point as you come back, because the point is wider here than it is here. So they take the gullet area out with a round file, and then they take put the V into it with the chisel file or the grinder. But that is actually not necessary as long as you keep a ratio correct on your depth gauge, because it won't touch. Both of those will be at the same. So when you start to look at file size, a chisel bit file is only about 1/8 of an inch wide. It sets up, like I said, a V tool, but you start to think about a round file that's smaller, and you hear people talking about filing a baby C, using a 5/32 or a 1/8 file in some cases back in there, and it cuts like crazy. Sometimes it'll dull quicker, but so will a square ground if you get into abrasive stuff. The semi-chisel tooth and the file ratio, its position and everything is a lot more forgiving than if you were to take a smaller file and try to hold it at the right size. And that takes a lot more control to do with the smaller file. You can use, if you're using 3/16 on that 7/32, you could use a guide and be able to maintain the proper height there. But it's something that, any of it you can do freehanded as long as you practice it correctly. That's the deal. And it's like, we've talked about before with grinders, is that so many times people say, I don't like grinders. Well, if you don't set the grinder up for your specific tooth profile and you have the proper size wheel on there, the same thing starts to apply that you start to see with improper hand filing, you know. And then the other thing is, a lot of times people try to grind off too much too fast and end up overheating and causing hardness problems. That whole thing comes about from applying the right angles and the right depths on that grinder to be able to maintain that and to keep the heat down. You've got, for some 1/4 inch pitch, they're using a 1/8 now, but 5/32 is probably the most common in the 3/8 extended pitch, and what steel calls as pico, or you get into some of the narrow kerf chains today. And then next up would be the 3/16, and then 11/64, and then you got 7/32, and then 13/64, then 7/32. So all of those are file diameters that basically range down for whatever that particular chain design is. And so a manufacturer would pick out what they feel to be the best for all around sharpening for that particular tooth design. And so that's where they put their confidence. And really, if we think through that a little bit, that's probably, as we've talked about earlier, is going to be probably the most effective system there to work with.
That's what I always go by is what it says on the box of the chain. If it says I need to use a 5/32 file, then that's what I'm using.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I got Tommy that works with me all the time, and he sharpens, and he sharpens a whole lot more than I do. And he'll look at it and say, I think I'd rather use this size file than what they spec out. And I think he's doing what you're talking about. He's still holding up that 1/5, and man, he can make a saw cut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you practice it just a little bit, it can be nice. It can really work. And then the last is the position of the file and the side angles, and that we just discussed too is thinking about where you hold it. The diameter is important, and then where you hold it in that side plate. So that's kind of the things I was thinking about. Robin checked in about 8:14.
That's cool. He's a good guy.
Howdy from Houston, he says.
I hope I don't go see him anytime soon. I was in Texas so long, I thought I was going to start getting mail down there. I'm happy to be back home.
Yeah. I was going to run just a little bit more of that chain video and think through that. Take a look at, see if you have any other questions on that. So I'm going to run that. So I'll be right back in just a minute. Many times people ask me, what size file should I have for my particular saw chain? And several years ago, I got into that conversation with a chain engineer. And he said, do people ask you about what size file you should have? I said, yeah, quite often. He said, what do you tell them? I said, well, you have to really go back to the manufacturer's equipment manuals. I do agree that that's probably one of the quickest and best places to find it. But there are several situations where they might say to use this on this tooth and this on this tooth as far as size-wise. Both chain sizes are the same, but the actual file you're going to be using might be a little bit smaller or larger diameter. And how he explained it is 1/5 or 20% of the cross-section or diameter of the file should actually be above the point, and we know what that is now, if it's in the proper position. So if I illustrate it this way, if I were to take this into 5 parts, 1/5 of it being above that point, then you would look for a visual of 90 degrees from that point to where the file rests in the gullet area. If we understand that, we're looking for a 90 degree. Some chains actually have a witness mark over here on the side that'll show you what that angle should be, that visual should be. So if I were to take this out, this is what the side of the tooth would look like if it's in the proper configuration. Now, alternative to that, and that would be what we call a hook. And that's what's illustrated here. If I were to take this out now, you can see that file was down below that point. And if your chain looks like this, it's not correct. You need to make sure that it looks like the one on the left. The one on the right is going to dull quickly. It's going to grab into the material more. But the other thing is it can cause it to rock and roll and increase the chances of reactive forces taking place also. The third one I have down here, this is called a back slope. And the situation with that we usually find on smaller chainsaws like bucket saws, climbing saws, or especially on pole saws. Pole saws use an extended pitch 3/8 chain, smaller profile, or a low profile 3/25 pitch. And so what happens is if you use a bigger file diameter on that, you end up with the point back behind the file, and you end up with a back slope on the tooth. And it takes a lot of pressure trying to get that to cut. Making sure that looks concave, but still a visual 90 degrees vertical there. So depth gauge, the point, and the side. The fourth one is up here. This is called the top plate of the tooth. You can see I have a witness mark on that also. That lets us know when that tooth is worn out. It also helps us to align that front angle. The top angle sets up the width of the kerf. The kerf is the slot that it makes into the fiber, the wood. And so more angle you have up to a point here, it moves this tooth to this side, this tooth to this side to open the width of the kerf. You must have a width opening for the bar and chain to go down through without binding. Most full chisel chains are about 25 degrees on this front side. That full chisel is square side, square top. Semi-chisel tooth, which usually has a rounded corner here, that usually goes 30 to 35 degrees. And the reason for that is it takes more movement to the side for that tooth to clear the chip on a semi-chisel tooth. So that's something on the top angle that we have to understand. And then number 5, the fifth one, is underneath the top plate. And that's called the top plate chisel angle. The chisel angle really scoops that chip out between the verticals. And that's usually set about, we say 45 degrees, like the front end of a flat chisel. But more or less, it's usually between 50 to 55 degrees that does that peeling action of the chip. So the depth gauge, the point, the side, the top, and the chisel. Now, if we could look at kind of an illustration here that kind of, this is a chisel out a opening here to more or less install, say, a hinge. I take a flat chisel, if this were one, which would have a beveled edge on it. I have a point here, point here. I could even mark it for 1/4 inch deep. And then I could take here and I drive that point in with the bevel to the inside. I drive this in and I do several verticals here that make this long area. And then I go over the width of my hinge or whatever. I turn the chisel over. I do the same thing on this side. So I've created 2 verticals, and both of them are the width of what chip I want to take out. Now I take that chisel and I chisel out between the two verticals. And that's exactly the chiseling process that your cutting tooth does on your saw chain. The left one and right one work together to actually take the whole chip out. So if we understand that, what we're setting up are cutting surfaces, in other words, correct angles, very sharp surfaces to be able to take that chip out with very little resistance and holding it in proper angles. This is a little bit of lore here to talk about as far as the design on this. You know, up until the middle 40s, there was a guy named Joe Cox. One day he was working in the woods. So Chris, that's kind of recovering back over a little bit of what we went through last week. And we'll pick up with some new things for next week. Robin wrote one thing here we might want to discuss a little bit. It says, I want to point out that a lot of chainsaw users will overspeed a saw with a dull chain and score the piston. We see that in the shop pretty regularly. Then he says, it's like putting your truck in the mud with racing slicks. It's easy to blow an engine. There's a lot of truth to that. You know, and I've seen that quite often where you know, a dull chain is not biting in, it's not changing the RPM, and like I said, you know, the RPM's not pulling down to about, you know, 9,500 of chain speed. It's up there 10,000, 10.5 or whatever. Like the engine though, with no loads, probably, you know, 12.5, 13,000, 14,000 RPM, whatever, and with no load on it, a lot of times heat goes up a little bit there too. So that can cause some piston scoring and stuff. It kind of takes the engine out of its design parameters. It's designed to be loaded a certain amount there, so sitting there free spinning over and over and over doesn't do a whole lot for that, keeping the heat down in the piston area. Good comment there, Robin.
Mm-hmm.
You ever seen that, Chris?
Yeah. Some saws come back. Didn't make it through the day. Had a 362 come back on the trip before last, and I think that's what was going on. The chain was dull, and they were just running it wide open all day, and yeah, we had some piston issues. So it's back in the pile for parts.
Well, good spare parts, I guess.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Was it an M-tronic or adjustable?
No, it was adjustable. It was one of the older 362s. I really like the 362. We have a lot of got a lot of good running saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had 5 or 6 of them. Had old one with a rear handle chain brake that I used for training for a while, and those were adjustable. And then when the M-tronic started to get popular, I changed over and went to that, and it was really expensive for the one with the declutching rear handle. So I just went with the M-tronic. I've had good luck. I've got one more that's an adjustable that I bought year before last, I think. But run the 562 XP most of the time in the later classes.
Yeah. I've been we most everything we have now is M-tronics, but I've been running a 550 XP during the trainings, and I hustle on it, and I love it. That's a good running saw. Smooth.
You got 325 pitch on it?
I do on that one. Yeah. Really well balanced. It feels really good in your hand. I love it.
High RPM saw too, so if you keep a good sharp chain, it turns up.
Yeah, I like them screaming. That's just me.
Well, we covered a good bit. I hope I can salvage out some video here, but I'll go through that and see what we've got. I appreciate you dropping in tonight. And where are you heading next week?
See, I'm actually in town next week, and then I think the following week I'm in South Georgia doing the training, then South Carolina just for a one-day demo, and then Illinois. So cover some ground.
Yeah, well, it's good to do before the cold weather, because although it's getting kind of cool up north, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking I probably got to have to break the hoodies out in Illinois. It's probably chilly up there already, especially for a Southern boy.
Yeah, start getting windy pretty quick too up there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to run this other little video here on the storm song workshop you have coming up in December. And we still
Yeah.
have some openings and like to start getting in. Payment's not really due until probably be the no later than the 1st of December. But if you are interested, you want to get your name on the list, so it's going to be a limited amount of people that can accept up there. And he's got lodging available. You've got breakfast and lunches will be covered, and there's some good places to eat there around town in Danville, Virginia.
Oh yeah.
Chris will be heading that one up, and so it's quite an opportunity for that particular workshop. And should be good weather up there at that point, and a little bit cooler, and be able to get out there on the. You're gonna be on the Chiles Ranch, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Or the Chiles Tree Farm, or the Chiles Farm, or
Yeah, I got some
tree farm, I guess you call it.
Yeah. I got some poplars I need to thin out. So they're about 18-inch diameter, most of them. So should be good. And my daughter usually hangs out and takes really good care of the trainees. So she's gonna bring coffee out to them, hot chocolate if it's too chilly, and she'll do a good job of taking care of us.
Very good, very good. I'll run this and come back, see if you got any other comments there. This is only about 4 or 5 minutes here.
Here's in the way, and then I'm gonna make my back cut, and then I'm gonna get 16 feet away from the cut.
It's a great class. I've really liked having all of the experiential learning, just learning from others as well and talking everything through.
An excellent training. For years, I've used a chainsaw by the seat of my pants. Good to get professional training.
Great class. You need to take it.
This is exactly the kind of training that I think we need as storm responders.
It's been really great.
Been a great experience. Really enjoyed the hands-on aspect and the group learning aspect. Really been put in situations where we can learn a lot, but they're also not super high pressure, so that we're able to work on refining some technique and getting that experience.
Awesome class. It's one of those you only know, or see, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know. Now I know what I didn't know.
So anything you want to add there, Chris?
Man, I don't think so. Looking forward to next week, and enjoyed. I learned some things tonight, so it was good.
All right. Well, thank y'all for all dropping in, and we hope to see you again next Thursday night. I finally got some of the sound straightened out, I guess. So hopefully next week we get everything logged in correctly. But it's always a challenge. But anyway, This is Tim Ard and Chris Chiles, and we wish you good sawing. See you next week.
Thank you, Tim.